Hello, and welcome to People of the Pod, brought to you by American Jewish Committee. Each week, we take you beyond the headlines to help you understand what they all mean for America, Israel, and the Jewish people. I'm your host, Manya Brashear-Pashman. Lone soldiers are members of the Israel Defense Forces who don't have immediate family to support them while they're serving. They face many challenges, including learning Hebrew, adapting to a new culture, and the physical and emotional demands of IDF service. And it may come as no surprise that lone soldiers also experience loneliness, especially on holidays celebrated back home. For 2 decades, AJC Jerusalem has held a special Thanksgiving dinner for lone soldiers. But after the Hamas terror attacks on October 7th, 2023, as many lone soldiers were dispatched across the country, AJC sent boxes of sweets and other Thanksgiving delicacies to 48 lone soldiers deployed at different bases. Here to talk about why they served as lone soldiers and the unique way they have volunteered their services since October 7th are 2 former lone soldiers, Kerren Seidner and LeRoy. Kerren, Nate, welcome to People of the Pod.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, Kerren, I'll start with you. If you wouldn't mind sharing with listeners your backstory. You were born in China, and then an Israeli couple living in the United States adopted you.
Correct. So I was adopted around 11 months old. Both my parents, my Israeli Jewish family, my parents, they were living in Los Angeles, California at the time. They adopted me. They went to China to come adopt me. And I have an older brother who is biological to my parents. And then I grew up with my entire family in a Jewish Israeli home.
And so had you ever been to Israel? What inspired you to go to Israel for the first time and then later to serve?
For me, I always grew up in Israeli household, growing up with the Israeli culture. I heard Hebrew every single day of my life, although I did not learn Hebrew. My parents did not teach me. I think the first time I went to Israel was for my brother's bar mitzvah when I was 6 years old. And so ever since then, we'd always go to Israel for the summer vacation. So I always grew up going to Israel. I've always been in touch with all my family and cousins, aunts and uncles that I have here in Israel. But I never thought I would ever come to Israel to serve until the age 16, where you grew up in an American house, like in the American lifestyle, where at age 18, you need to decide if you want to go to college or university or figure out what you want to do in life. So then I started thinking, you know what, maybe studying in Israel might be an option. But then my older brother decided that he had just decided to draft to the army. So I thought maybe that might be a possibility for myself. And then overnight, it just kind of happened that I wanted to make Aliyah and draft to the army. My mom said, you know what, you should be a combat soldier, because it was very new at that time for girls to be in combat.
So why did she encourage you to do combat?
Growing up, I've always done sports. I played soccer for 11 years. So I was always active. And I think my mom knew, coming from my dad, because most of the time I would spend with my dad. My mom in our household is different, where my mom was out working and my dad was a stay-at-home dad mostly. So I was always with him. And I always heard the stories of him being an officer in combat. And then right at age 16, my brother had just drafted to Sayed Golani. So hearing all these stories, my mom just knew it was very fitting for me to go to combat as well.
Nate, you grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, and did you first come to Israel on a gap year, or had you been before?
So my first trip to Israel was actually with my Jewish day school. We have a small, strong Jewish day school in Charleston called Adelston Hebrew Academy. Every 8th grade each year does a trip. So that was my first experience in Israel. I came back with Young Judea on a summer program before senior year of high school, and then lived here on my gap year, Young Judea year course, immediately after high school as well.
And then what drew you to serve as a lone soldier?
I think a huge part of it, like Kerren was talking about, was growing up with, for me, it wasn't an Israeli family, but a really strong, close, tight-knit community in Charleston. And I have to give a lot of credit to Young Judea as well, especially to Camp Judea, where I grew up in just an extremely Zionist, welcoming, loving environment. And we had dozens of Israelis working on our staff every summer. So having that kind of constant flood growing up of Israelis each summer, even if it wasn't in the house, camp is really that home for a month each year, especially later on in high school working there. And ultimately the gap year as well, being here, living here for a year, being able to experience Israel, really feeling like you get kind of absorbed into society was a huge part of it. And I kind of looked around at the time at Israelis my age and felt, okay, I'm 18 years old, they're 18 years old. We hear all the time that Israel is the Jewish nation, the Jewish state. We never hear that it's the Israeli nation, the Israeli state. So why do only the people who are born here have to serve? And I kind of felt like, for me, the best way to do something and to serve the Jewish people and the Jewish state in Israel was through the army, and kind of like my service for myself was also mandatory. And that was the path I chose, to serve through that way.
And what year did you serve, Nate?
I drafted in 2020.
In 2020, and then served until when?
I served until the end of 2021 through the Machal program, which allows you to draft before you make Aliyah. So you do a shortened service of 18 months.
Okay. And then Kerren, when did you serve?
I drafted December 2019.
And served for how long?
Until August 2022.
Okay. And so you said, Kerren, that you sought to be in combat. Did you see combat as an IDF soldier?
Yes. I was in Ariot Eden. It's a co-ed unit in Israel. It's a regular reconnaissance unit, like Golani, Tzanchanim, Nachal, but co-ed. We're just mostly on the border, so it's underneath the unit of Chigvulot. So that translates to border patrol. So there's other units like Kakal, which was very much known in the recent war, and Baudalas, which they're on the borders mostly with Egypt. I was on the Jordanian border within the West Bank.
And Nate, how did you serve, or where did you serve?
I served in Golani, in Gdud 51, so the 51st Brigade. And we served kind of all around. We did our training in the Merkaz Israel, the middle of Israel in the north, and then served on various borders, on Gaza and up north and throughout the West Bank as well.
Now, are you both in reserves now?
I currently serve in reserves. I'm not at this moment. I finished reserves in the summer. We were in Gaza for 2 months with my unit most recently.
And Kerren, how about you? Are you still a reservist?
Yes. From October 7th, I served about 2 months, and then I got released for about half a year, and then I just did about 2 months in the summer as well.
All right. And can you say where?
They put me wherever they need. In the first part, I moved 8 times in the span of 2 months. So wherever they put me.
When you're not serving, when you're not fighting or seeing combat, you volunteer in a very unique way. Can you tell our listeners how you have continued to serve those who are in the IDF?
For us, we volunteer with Ach Gadol. It's a special program where people like us who are post-lone soldiers, who we have lone soldiers who are currently serving, and we mentor them throughout their entire service. I currently have 3 soldiers, and 2 of them are actually combat soldiers.
And Nate?
Yeah, so like Kerren said, it's a great summary. Ach Gadol, which means big brother, or you can translate it to big sister as well. We both volunteer with the organization. I had the privilege of volunteering in a lone soldier house in Tel Aviv as well. So it's just a place where lone soldiers can stay on the weekends when they're off base, if they don't have a place to go, or some of them who might do kind of daily jobs where they go to and from their army service each day. If they're in intelligence, they can stay there as well if it's closer to base. So I volunteered there a little bit and have a little brother. It's funny to say because he's my age. We actually both overlapped at Tulane University in the States for a year, but didn't meet each other until we got here and got matched through the organization. So he's my one little brother right now. And it's been great. It's a great way to have a connection with someone. I personally received a lot of help from the generations before me. And I think most lone soldiers did, because you really can't do this by yourself. As funny as that is, being called a lone soldier, you really can't do it alone. And it's just great. It felt definitely like the right thing to do, to turn around and give it to the current generation and future generations.
What do lone soldiers need now that's different from when you served?
I think a lot of the challenges stay the same in terms of you encounter adulthood all of a sudden when you get here, in terms of finding an apartment, figuring out how to live your life by yourself, figuring out all that sort of adulthood stuff. And on top of it, you have the army, which is a massive thing to navigate, a massive language issue. And I think right now, I'll speak personally with my own relationship with the person I volunteer with Josh. When you throw war on top of that, which by itself is more than enough to deal with, how can you figure out your apartment and your contract when you've been in Gaza for the last 2 months? How can you figure out, you have to leave combat in a war zone and go back and do your own laundry? And it's those little things that really make a difference, where someone who is Israeli and has a family here and has the support they need, they go back and they're in that support circle. And no matter what you come back from, even if you come back from, when I was serving just the most regular week in the army, when you come back and you just want to check out for the weekend and be with your friends, and you have this kind of list of errands piling up, it's difficult. And coming back from combat, from war, from fighting, from losing friends, it's just 100 times more difficult. I think it's super important to make sure people have the support they need in all of those things, and also know that they have the space to talk about stuff and to share things that are difficult for them, and to reach out to someone who's going through similar things.
For me, it's a very deep question, but I think that, like how Nate said, the whole thing about being a lone soldier, no matter times of war or in normal times, we like to say normal times, but it's still hard. You need the support no matter what. I think especially just during the times of this war and in any war, just the mental, because I feel like having to have been in Middle Weem, I also struggled with it as well. Going to Middle Weem, being in the duty of being in the army and that mindset of a soldier, and then coming home to civilian life, it's very different. Especially then you come to civilian life, and I'm here like in Herzliya, and you also don't feel necessarily safe because you have also rockets all the time. Like I had one this morning as well. So it's really can be scary at times, but I think what's so special about Israel, we have the support from one another, not just from people like me who was a lone soldier trying to help out with other lone soldiers, but just random civilians on the street, really just uplifting.
Can you kind of describe what you're talking about? What do you mean by that?
I think for me, ever since I moved to Israel, I say Israel is definitely home. The people here are very different. I grew up in Los Angeles area, so I really feel like there was very materialistic. And ever since moving here, there's so many people that just want to help one another. And I really seen that a lot throughout the war. Even through my service, being a lone soldier, people would just hand me money left and right. People constantly are asking, do you have a place for Shabbat? To not feel alone on Shabbat, which means a lot.
And what about Thanksgiving and other holidays that you traditionally celebrated? How have you been able to mark those occasions in Israel?
I think for me, and going off of a big thing Kerren spoke about, something I also lived in Herzliya during my service, and there's a fantastic self-made group of just moms and dads and everyday people from the community there of Israelis who, whenever we'd go home, especially on holidays, Rosh Hashanah and stuff, people would either volunteer to host us, or a lot of times we just receive Friday afternoon. Someone would come by, they'd have a list of all of our addresses if we were in this group chat, and they just drop off home-cooked meals and say, this is this Friday night, you and your roommates have this Shabbat dinner, enjoy, don't worry about cooking. And having that home-cooked meal, even if it's not my mom, mom's cooking, it's a great feeling and a great experience. And another thing that I've had, and I've been super fortunate to, and I'm sure I know a lot of us do as well, a lot of lone soldiers, is in the absence of your immediate family, your friends really become your family. And I'm still lucky to this day to have people who I met during my time in the army and I served with who we're still in touch. We still hang out together. And some of us, Thanksgiving specifically, people who can get home and it works out with work, they go, and I'm jealous of them. I wish I could as well. But we do our best to cook a great Thanksgiving dinner. And turkeys are a little hard to come by here, but we get a couple rotisserie chickens, and a bird's a bird. And we try to do the best we can to have this sort of family experiences and family holidays.
Kerren, how about you? Do you mark Thanksgiving in any particular way or other holidays?
For me, Thanksgiving, honestly, I don't think I do. Only because for me, every Friday night is like Thanksgiving to me. For me, Yom Shishi, the Ach Shishi is super important for me. Because we are lone soldiers, I always try to make sure I spend it with friends who, how like Nate said, it's become like family. So living here in Herzliya, there is a big community of people, only like myself. So we became like a little family of our own. So we always do Shabbat together, or I am in touch with when I moved here and did the army, I had a host family. So I am still in touch with my host family from the army, and I see them. They just live in the north in a moshav, so it's kind of hard for me to get there all the time. But I try to celebrate the Hebrew holidays, the Jewish holidays mostly.
Do your families get to Israel throughout the year? Have they traveled there to see you, even if you aren't able to get back to Los Angeles or Charleston to see them?
For me, my dad was really nervous when the war first broke out. And Nefesh B'Nefesh opened up flights for one parent to come to Israel for lone soldiers. So he was able to get one of those flights and was able to see me during the war. And then my mom came not too long after that for a wedding that our cousin's wedding was canceled throughout the war. So it was postponed. And so she came for our cousin's wedding. But I haven't gone home in a year and a half. So I'm luckily going back in February to visit.
My family was able to come to visit at the end of my service, which was really important for me, for them to be able to see me. 'Cause I guess you drafted just a few months before me, but we both served during COVID, which is just also now nothing compares to serving now. But it was a super weird, wild time of all sorts of closures and rules and different things. So for my family to be able to come after the kind of general lockdown and everything of COVID was really great, for them to be able to be here while I was in the army. And they haven't been able to come visit since then, but they still want to and still will. I think sometime in this coming year, my parents may be able to come out to visit.
And when was the last time you went to Charleston?
I was lucky enough, I was able to go back a few months ago. When I finished my reserve service over the summer, I went back for a little bit to see my family and see some friends.
What did you gain from serving in the IDF?
I think it's kind of immeasurable to an extent. I think that the person I was when I went in, it's still very much the person I am now, but you experience so much and you change so much. And I drafted at 21 years of age, but growing so much over those kind of really formative years. But I think that I learned more about myself than I ever expected to. I learned about the importance of commitment to other people and the reaffirmment of committing to the greater good. And I think something I learned about people is just always to give people the benefit of the doubt, and to know that people usually do try their best and they have your best intentions in mind, and to give them the space to be able to show that and prove that. You're in a lot of really, just within your team and people, you're shoulder to shoulder. You never get a minute by yourself, and it gets very intense in a lot of situations with the people you serve with. But just learning to kind of give them that space and trust people and know that they want what's best for you and you want what's best for them, no matter how much each moment might get kind of chippy at certain points. It's something that you can only really experience through those tougher ordeals.
Kerren, what did you take away from your service in the IDF?
I think for me, it was really hard. I was going through a lot. When I first moved to Israel, I was 18, and I didn't necessarily want to leave LA. At that moment, I was finally in a friend group where I felt like I belonged. So it was really hard for me to have just decided to move across the country, or the world, not the country. And I didn't really know the language, so it was still hard, which is always going to be a little hard. And then getting put somewhere in the middle of nowhere, not knowing anything, I think I definitely changed in a way that I've opened up a lot more. I was very closed off. And I tell people all the time, like my friends today, they didn't know me when I was 18, and I was very closed off. I don't even think I would be doing something like this even today. In the army, you're just put with a bunch of girls, and you don't know the full language, but you just gotta get to know them. And I even tell my friends today that the girls who are with me in the Army, who are my best friends today, hang out with them all the time. And they will even say that the first year I did not talk to them. And I think because we were stuck in quarantine for 2 weeks, we were forced to spend time. I had to just open up and actually get to know them. And I regretted not getting to know them earlier. And I'm so much happier that I open up and reach out. And that's something with Ach Gadol, where you just kind of maybe need to make that extra step, the first step, because there's new lone soldiers today who are just maybe scared to do that first step because they're in a new country and we've been there before.
I ask you both what you gained from your time in the IDF, but it is a sacrifice, and for which we're very grateful that you made. What did you lose by serving in the IDF? What did you sacrifice?
I think without the risk of being overly cheesy, I feel very lucky to have had a great service and to have experienced the Army I got lucky and I had a great service. And there are a lot of people around me who weren't so lucky and kind of, things didn't fall their way and they had a less good service or a bad service to a certain extent. So I'm very fortunate that I can say I didn't lose anything that I wasn't willing to and that I didn't know I was going to sacrifice beforehand. I did a year at Tulane before and chose to leave that behind and come and do the Army, and knew I'd finish my studies at some point, which I'm doing now. And I guess I lost, 2 or 3 more years of partying in college in the States and a lot of experiences with close friends who I'm fortunate to still be close with. But that's a decision and choice that I made and knew I was making when I came over here. And, a couple of Mardi Gras would have been great. COVID softened the blow a little that they were canceled or didn't happen to the full extent. But again, I'm just fortunate to have, only missed the experiences that I thought I would be able to miss.
Yeah, I think I lucked out that I really enjoyed my service and I don't regret anything about it. And I always say that I'm going to stay here in Israel forever. This is home. I always say, to my friends who are drafting now and to my soldiers now, that I'll support them no matter what. If they have any regrets or if they went to combat and they regretted that decision or any other decision, I really do believe God has a path for every single person. And I think that we make mistakes, we have to learn, and we may regret some things, but I think that doing the Army was the path that I was meant to do, and I don't regret any of it.
One more question for you both. And that is, I asked you what you lost from serving in the IDF, but so many people lost loved ones and friends on October 7th. Did you lose anyone or know anyone who was killed or kidnapped on October 7th?
For me, not on October 7th. I have a friend of mine. His name is Omer Balva. They actually have an Instagram page called Be Kind as Omer. And we did go in Sabal together. He was in the Moshav next to me. And he actually started university with me at the same time. So that was really hard for me. And I was able to go to his funeral. That was the first time I was out of Middlewing. And then throughout after I got released in July, my mifaked, unfortunately, was killed in a motorcycle accident. And he did Middlewing and everything. And it was just very unfortunate to have lost him in such an unfortunate way. And then far relative cousin on my dad's side is actually kidnapped still to this day.
I am so sorry, Kerren. I want to let listeners know you're referring to your cousin, Sahi Idan. And Kerren, I hope you don't mind me sharing that his 18-year-old daughter, Ma'ayan, was murdered in their home on October 7th before her father was taken into Gaza. In fact, she was helping her father hold the door to the safe room closed, and she was shot through the door. It is a horrific story Thank you so much, Kerren, for sharing that about your friend and your cousin. Nate?
So I was fortunate to not have anyone that I was close with who passed away on the 7th. There were several people I served with, kind of in an extended relationship with, or distant relationship with, who passed away fighting in the kibbutzim in the south. And about a month after the 7th, someone in my extended family, one of my cousins, a lone soldier from Atlanta, Rose Lubin, was killed in a terrorist attack in Jerusalem. And actually this coming week is the yard site for the first time. So a lot of family on her side live here in Israel. So everyone's kind of has a fantastic week of really meaningful, important events taking place. Everyone's coming over for it from the States as well. So it'll be a really meaningful, moving week to remember her.
Thank you both so very much for your service, for all you're doing to support the soldiers, especially at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just one last thing. Anyone who's interested in Ach Gadol and wants to find us online, I'm sure there'll be a link somewhere with this podcast, but feel free to search us on Google or wherever. Ach Gadol, or in Hebrew, Ach Gadol Aman Chaylim Bodedim. And thank you so much for having me on the show, and thank you.
What he said. Thank you.
If you missed last week's episode, tune in for my conversation with Bel Ueli, AJC's Chief Advocacy Officer, about the International Criminal Court's charges against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. She explains why, regardless of political views about this Israeli administration, the charges tied to Israel's defense operations in Gaza are unjust. Thank you for listening. This episode is brought to you by AJC. Our producer is Atara Lakritz. Our sound engineer is TK Broderick. You can subscribe to People of the Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, or learn more at ajc.org/peopleofthepod. The views and opinions of our guests don't necessarily reflect the positions of AJC. We'd love to hear your views and opinions or your questions. You can reach us at peopleofthepod@ajc.org. If you've enjoyed this episode, please be sure to tell your friends, tag us on social media with #peopleofthepod, and hop on to Apple Podcasts to rate us and write a review to help more listeners find us. Tune in next week for another episode of People of the Pod.